She closed her eyes and stepped into the water. The crowd gasped as the water swallowed her legs, her waist, her chest. She held Duduke high above her head, her arms shaking but unyielding, the red gown clinging to her like blood. The water rose to her neck, then her chin. For a moment she was gone, submerged completely, the pool closing over her like a grave. The crowd screamed, "Jesus! She didn't drown!" But then, like a miracle, she emerged on the other side, gasping, her baby still held high, still crying but alive. Water streamed from her gown, her eyes burning with a fire no one could name. She staggered toward the clinic, her voice a broken whisper. "Duduke! Duduke!" Dumebi staggered into the clinic, her red gown dripping water onto the cracked tiles. The nurse, Sister Grace, rushed forward. "Bring the child quick!" she shouted, taking Duduke from Dumebi's trembling arms. The baby's fever was high, her small body limp. Dumebi stood frozen, her lips moving. Duduke, Duduke. Sister Grace worked fast, wrapping Duduke in a blanket, checking her pulse. "Malaria," she said grimly. "But we go try our best." Dumebi didn't move, her eyes fixed on her child. The crowd outside peered through the window, their voices a low hum. "She no go make 'em," they said. "Mad woman and her baby." Days passed. Dumebi never left Duduke's side, kneeling by the small cot, her hand brushing the baby's brow. "Duduke," she whispered, her voice a broken song. Sister Grace watched her, saw the love in her eyes. Not madness, but a fire that could burn the world. Slowly, miraculously, Duduke's fever broke. Her small eyes fluttered open, her laughter returning like a soft breeze. Dumebi's face lit up, and for the first time, she broke down. She fell to her knees, her body shaking with sobs, her hands clutching the edge of the cot. "Duduke, my Duduke." The market women, who had come with gifts, pap, oranges, a tiny dress for Duduke, watched in silence. They saw Dumebi's tears, her relief, her love. But in that moment of vulnerability, Dumebi didn't notice the shadows moving outside the clinic. She didn't see the two men, their faces hard, their eyes glinting with intent. When Dumebi finally stood, wiping her tears, she reached for Duduke. The cot was empty. Her heart stopped. "Duduke!" she whispered, her voice rising. "Duduke!" She spun around, her gown flaring, her eyes wild. The nurse was gone, tending to another patient. The market women were outside, chatting. Dumebi ran to the door, screaming, "Duduke! My Duduke!" She burst into the street, the rain still falling, her bare feet slapping the mud. She saw them, two men running toward the exit of the market, one clutching a bundle wrapped in a blanket. Duduke's cry echoed, faint but unmistakable. Dumebi's voice broke into a song, desperate and raw. "Duduke, Duduke." The baby's cries grew louder, as if answering her mother's call. Dumebi ran, her gown tearing at the seams, her legs burning. The crowd parted, shouting, "Mad woman de chase thiefo!" The man carrying Duduke glanced back, his eyes wide with fear. He stumbled, tripping over a pile of discarded crates, and fell hard. The blanket slipped, and Duduke rolled onto the ground, crying. The man scrambled to his feet, abandoning the baby, and fled with his partner into the maze of Oshodi's alleys. Dumebi dropped to her knees, scooping Duduke into her arms. "Duduke! My Duduke!" She rocked her, tears streaming down her face, her voice a trembling song. From that day, Dumebi changed. She became fierce, her eyes sharp as a hawk's. She never let Duduke out of her sight, clutching her tightly, her red gown a warning to anyone who came too close. The market women respected her, but they worried. "She no dey let anybody near that baby," Mama Ngozi said. "How she go cope?" One day, a little girl named Amaka, no more than 6, approached Dumebi under the mango tree. Amaka's eyes sparkled with mischief, her braids bouncing as she ran. She reached for Duduke, giggling, wanting to play. Dumebi snarled, her body tensing, and chased the girl, her gown flaring like fire. Amaka laughed, thinking it was a game, dodging Dumebi's outstretched hands. The market women watched, some laughing, others shaking their heads. But Amaka kept coming back, day after day, her laughter a constant challenge. Dumebi chased her, but slowly she began to notice something. Amaka wasn't afraid. She wasn't mocking. She just wanted to play with Dudukeo, to make her laugh. One afternoon, as Dumebi sat under the mango tree, she watched a group of children playing nearby, kicking a deflated football, their laughter filling the air. Duduke, now a toddler, wiggled in her arms, reaching toward the sound. Dumebi's heart tightened. She looked at her daughter, then at the children. Duduke, she whispered, her voice soft. She stood, carrying Duduke to where Amaka played. The little girl looked up, surprised, as Dumebi set Duduke down. Play, Dumebi said, her voice rough but clear. Amaka grinned, taking Duduke's hand. The two children giggled, chasing each other, their laughter a melody that made the market pause. Dumebi watched, her eyes soft for the first time in months. Exhausted, she sat under the tree and closed her eyes, her body relaxing. She didn't know how long she slept, but when she woke, the market was quiet. Too quiet. Her heart raced. Duduke? She stood, her eyes scanning the crowd. Duduke was gone. So was Amaka. Her breath caught, her chest tightening as she spun around, searching. Then she saw them. The same two men from the clinic, dragging Amaka and Duduke toward the market's exit. Their hands rough, the children struggling. Dumebi screamed, Duduke! She ran, her legs pumping, her red gown tearing further. The market erupted, traders shouting, Okadas swerving. She pushed through the crowd, her voice a desperate song, Duduke! Duduke! But her strength failed her. Her legs buckled, her body weak from days of hunger and sleepless nights. She fell to her knees, her hands clawing the mud, tears streaming down her face. Duduke! My Duduke! The men disappeared into the shadows, their figures swallowed by the maze of Oshodi's backstreets. Dumebi's sobs echoed, her voice breaking. She couldn't save them, not alone. Her heart burned with despair, but a spark of realization flickered. She needed help. She needed the village. Dumebi staggered to her feet, her gown heavy with mud, her eyes wild with purpose. She ran to Mama Ngozi's stall, where the fish seller was sorting her wares, her hands slick with scales. Dumebi fell before her voice gone, her throat raw from screaming. She couldn't speak, couldn't form the words to explain. Instead, she began to dance. The same dance she did for Duduke, her arms swaying, her feet stomping the earth, her eyes streaming with tears. Duduke, she whispered, her voice a broken plea. Mama Ngozi froze, her eyes narrowing. She saw the desperation in Dumebi's dance, the anguish in her tears. Waitin happen? She asked, stepping closer. Dumebi pointed toward the market's exit, her hands trembling, gesturing wildly. A car, men, her baby. Mama Ngozi's face hardened. Them done take Duduke again? She asked. Dumebi nodded, her sobs choking her. And Amaka too? Dumebi's hands shook, pointing again, her dance growing frantic. Mama Ngozi didn't hesitate. She grabbed her wrapper, tying it tight, and shouted, Oh, Shodi people! Them done steal Dumebi baby and Amaka! Come out-o! Her voice carried over the market, sharp and commanding. Traders dropped their wares. Okada drivers stopped their bikes. Children paused their games. The market came alive, a tide of voices rising. Who dare touch Dumebi baby? One woman shouted. We go find them! An old man roared, grabbing his walking stick. The crowd grew. Young women with babies on their backs. Old men with weathered faces. Children clutching sticks and stones. They followed Dumebi, who ran ahead, her red gown a beacon in the fading light. They sang as they moved, their voices weaving Simi's Dudukes into a battle cry. Duduke, Duduke, my baby oh. The song echoed through Oshodi, a chorus of defiance, of love, of community. Even the children joined in, their high voices piercing the dusk. Dumebi led them to the edge of the market, where the streets turned to shadows. Her legs burned, her breath ragged, but she didn't stop. The crowd followed, their footsteps a thunderous rhythm, their song a beacon. They reached an uncompleted building, its skeletal frame looming like a ghost in the twilight. The crowd was tired, their voices faltering, their bodies slumping against the walls. "We done rest small," Mama Ngozi said, wiping sweat from her brow. "But we no go give up." Dumebi couldn't rest. She stood at the edge of the building, her gown torn, her voice gone. She sang anyway, a hoarse whisper, "Duduke, Duduke." Her body swayed, her dance a desperate prayer. The crowd watched, their hearts heavy. Then, a sound. A faint cry, high and sharp, like a bird in the dark. Dumebi froze, her head snapping toward the building. She sang again, louder. "Duduke." The cry came again, clearer, joined by another. Amaka's voice, small but fierce. Dumebi ran, her bare feet pounding the dirt, her gown flapping like a flag. A child in the crowd screamed, "Dumebi de Rano!" The villagers surged to their feet, their exhaustion forgotten, their song rising again. "Du-du-ke, du-du-ke." The sound of 1,000 footsteps shook the earth, a tidal wave of voices and purpose. Inside the building, the kidnappers froze, their faces pale. They heard the cries, the song, the thunder of the crowd. They clutched Duda, Duduke, and Amaka, their hands trembling, but the noise was too much. The will of Oshodi too strong. In a panic, they dropped the children, abandoning them in a corner of the uncompleted building, and fled into the night. Dumebi burst through the doorway, her eyes wild, her voice a rasp. "Duduke!" She found her baby, curled up beside Amaka, both crying but alive. She scooped Duduke into her arms, hugging her tightly, her tears falling onto the child's face. Then she reached for Amaka, pulling the girl close, her small body shaking. The crowd poured in, their song fading into cheers. "We done find them!" Mama Ngozi shouted, her voice breaking with relief. Some of the men chased after the kidnappers, their shouts echoing as they apprehended the fleeing men, dragging them back to face the village's wrath. Amaka clung to Dumebi, her small hands gripping the red gown, her sobs mixing with Duduke's. The crowd surrounded them, their faces a mix of joy and fury, their song a soft hum now, a lullaby for the rescued children. You'd think the story would end here, with Dumebi clutching her Duduke, Amaka safe, and the kidnappers caught. But it didn't.